15th of June, 1944. A hedgerow in Normandy. The night is absolute, broken only by distant artillery that rumbles like approaching thunder. A British commando lies motionless in the wet grass, fingers wrapped around a weapon that weighs barely more than a bag of sugar. It is crude, brutally simple. The metal still warm from a firefight that ended minutes ago. 50 meters away, German voices drift through the darkness, nervous, uncertain. The commando's weapon cost the British government precisely £2.10 to manufacture, less than a decent pair of boots, less than half the price of the Lee Enfield. Rifle every other infantryman carried. The Germans have a name for it, whispered with a mixture of contempt and fear. Gangster Gewehr. The Gangster's Gun. They are not entirely wrong. This weapon should not exist. By every conventional measure of military engineering, it is a catastrophe. It jams. It fires when dropped. Its magazine falls out if looked at incorrectly. British soldiers despise it. American troops refuse to carry it. Even some resistance fighters, desperate for anything that shoots, have tossed them aside in disgust. Yet by the time the war ends, Britain will have manufactured nearly 4 million of them. More than any other weapon in British military history. The Sten gun changed how wars are fought, how resistance movements operate, how nations arm themselves when time and money have run out. It proved that sometimes the best weapon is not the most refined, but the one you can actually produce when civilization is collapsing around you. This is the story of how Britain created a submachine gun so cheap it cost less than a rifle, so crude it could be manufactured in a bicycle shop, and so effective it terrified the most professional army in Europe. The problem Britain faced in 1940 was not merely one of equipment shortage, it was existential. The British Expeditionary Force had left. Nearly everything on the beaches of Dunkirk, rifles, artillery, vehicles, ammunition, all abandoned in the desperate evacuation. The figure is stark. 68,000 vehicles lost. 2,472 guns left behind, 475,000. Tons of ammunition and stores gone. Britain's army, such as it remained, possessed enough equipment to arm perhaps 11 divisions. Germany could field 150. But the material losses, catastrophic as they were, paled beside a more fundamental problem. Britain's entire approach to manufacturing weapons belonged to another era. Each Lee Enfield rifle required 47 hours of machining time, 50 separate operations, skilled craftsmen working with precision lathes and milling machines. Each Bren light machine gun took 80 hours to produce. These were beautiful weapons, superbly accurate, built to last decades. They were also slow. Impossibly slow. In June 1940, British factories produced roughly 10,000 rifles per week. Germany was producing 60,000. The mathematics of it was simple and horrifying. Britain could not win an arms race it was already losing by a factor of 6 to 1. Then there was the tactical reality that Dunkirk had made brutally clear. The Wehrmacht's success relied heavily on close quarters, firepower. German infantry sections carried MP-38 and MP-40 submachine guns, lightweight, automatic weapons that could lay down devastating fire. In street fighting, house clearing, ambushes, British infantry had bolt-action rifles, magnificently accurate at 800 yards, largely useless. When the enemy was 30 feet away coming through a doorway, Britain possessed precisely one submachine gun design, the Thompson, purchased from America at £50 per unit. Excellent weapon, impossible price. Britain needed thousands upon thousands of automatic weapons immediately, and it had neither the time, the machinery, nor the skilled labor to produce them the old way. The solution came not from the military establishment, but from two men working at the Royal Arsenal's design department in Enfield, Major Reginald Phi Shepherd and Harold Turpin. Their brief was impossible. Create a submachine gun that could be manufactured with minimal machining, using unskilled labor from the cheapest possible materials in factories never designed for weapons production, and do it in weeks, not years. The MP-40, Germany's submachine gun, required 37 separate machined components. Shepherd and Turpin's design would use two. The Sten, named for the initials of its designers and Enfield, was an exercise in brutal simplification. The receiver, the heart of the weapon, was not machined from solid steel. It was a simple steel tube, basic pipe, roughly 200 millimeters long, 32 millimeters in diameter. You could buy something similar from a plumber. The bolt was equally primitive, a heavy block of steel with a fixed firing pin. No gas system, no complicated locking mechanism, just mass and momentum. When you pulled the trigger, a spring pushed the bolt forward. The bolt stripped a round from the magazine, chambered it, and the fixed firing pin struck the primer. The explosion drove the bolt backwards against spring pressure. The empty case ejected. The bolt returned forward. Another round chambered. Simple, violent, effective. The barrel was equally crude, roughly 200 millimeters of rifled steel. Tube screwed into the receiver, no fancy manufacturing required. The stock was a simple metal strut welded to the receiver, the magazine. Housing was a rectangular piece of sheet steel welded at a right angle. The whole weapon could be assembled from parts produced by stamp pressing and simple welding processes any workshop with basic equipment could manage. Weight, 3.2 kilograms. Length, 760 millimeters. Rate of fire, 550 rounds per minute. Effective range, 75 meters, optimistically. Beyond that, the 9mm parabellum round lost most of its energy. But for house-to-house fighting, ambushes, close quarters work, it was perfect. The first prototype was ready by January 1941. By June the 1st, production models were leaving factories, not traditional arms, manufacturers, but bicycle shops, automotive plants, workshops that had never produced anything more lethal than a bed spring. The entire weapon contained 47 parts, only 5 of which required any precision machining. A semi-skilled worker could assemble one in 5 hours. Compare this to the Thompson, 700 parts, 40 hours of skilled labor, £50 cost. The Sten, 47 parts, 5 hours of semi-skilled work, £2.50. Britain had found its equalizer. Production figures reflect the desperation and the triumph. By the end of 1941, Britain was producing 20,000 Sten guns per month. By 1942, 50,000 per month. By 1943, nearly 70,000 per month, factories across. Britain churned them out. Birmingham Small Arms, Royal Ordnance Factory, Fazekerley, Lines Brothers, Toy Factory, even the London Midland Scottish railway workshops. Exact production numbers remain partially classified, but conservative estimates place the final total at 3.7 million weapons. Some sources suggest the true figure exceeds 4 million, no other. British weapon has ever been produced in such quantities, no other weapon could have been, but cheap and plentiful came with costs. The Sten was dangerous, not just to the enemy. The early Mark I version had a wooden foregrip to protect the user's hand. By the Mark II, even that luxury was eliminated. Soldiers held the magazine housing itself, which promptly bent under rough handling, causing jams. The weapon fired from an open bolt, meaning the bolt was held back by the sear until the trigger was pulled. Drop the weapon hard enough and the bolt could jar loose, firing automatically. This was not a theoretical concern. British soldiers died from accidental discharges. The single-column magazine was adapted from the German MP40 design, and it was spectacularly unreliable. Load all 32 rounds and the spring compressed too much. Result, failure to feed. The unofficial rule became load 28 rounds maximum, hope for the best. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than Yet for all its faults, the Sten worked, and critically, it worked in environments where precision weapons failed. Dropped in mud? Rinse it. Off? Submerged in water? Shake it out. The simplicity that made it crude also made it nearly indestructible. Resistance fighters across occupied Europe discovered this. The Sten became the weapon of the French Maquis, the Polish Home Army, the Yugoslav partisans, the Greek Elas. Thousands upon thousands were dropped by parachute in cylindrical containers, wrapped in waxed paper, along with ammunition and grenades. The Sten could be broken down into 4 main components in seconds: barrel, receiver, stock, magazine, small enough to hide in a coat, under a floor, in a barn wall, Gangster the Gangster Gun, implying it was beneath contempt, a criminal's weapon unworthy of professional soldiers. Then they began copying it. By 1944, Germany was producing the MP3008, a near-exact duplicate of the Sten Mark II, manufactured using the same stamped steel. Techniques, the same crude simplicity. When Germany's industrial capacity began collapsing under Allied bombing, the complexity of the MP40 became a fatal weakness. The MP3008 could be produced in workshops with minimal equipment. Roughly 10,000 were manufactured in the final months of the war. The Nazis had learned the lesson too late. Sophistication is worthless when you cannot afford it. Compare this to the American approach. The United States produced the M3. Grease gun, equally crude in appearance, equally cheap. Roughly $20 compared to the Thompson's $200. But American production never reached desperation levels. The M3 was produced alongside Thompson's, Garand's, BARS. America had the luxury of choice. Britain did not. The M3 produced 680,000 units, perfectly adequate for American needs. Britain produced 4 million Stens because anything less meant defeat. The Americans could afford to equip elite units with quality weapons. Britain needed to arm everyone with anything. The Soviet approach was different again. The PPSH-41 was crude by peacetime standards, but far more refined than the Sten. It used a 71 round drum magazine, had a higher rate of fire, featured a wooden stock. It was also considerably more expensive and time-consuming to produce. The Soviets manufactured roughly 6 million PPSH-41s during the war. Impressive. But Soviet industrial capacity dwarfed Britain's. The USSR had vast factories in the Urals, beyond German bomber range, with access to endless raw materials. Britain was a besieged island, importing steel, rationing everything. The Sten was a weapon of necessity, born from constraints the Soviets never faced. Records of the Sten's operational effectiveness remain frustratingly incomplete. Much is classified. Much was never properly documented in the chaos of war. But fragments exist. British commandos used Stens extensively in Norway, in raids along the French coast, in Italy. The silenced Marksman IS version became infamous, fitted with a massive, integral suppressor that made the weapon nearly silent, the sound. Compared to a hand clap or a heavy book closing, it was used by special. Operations executive agents for assassinations, sabotage, silent, elimination of sentries. The SS learned to fear that distinctive, muffled crack, a sound that meant someone was already dead before their comrades heard the shot. French resistance fighters used Stens in countless ambushes and attacks. Exact figures are impossible to verify. Records were deliberately destroyed or never kept. But estimates suggest the SOE dropped over 250,000 Stens to resistance movements across Europe, each weapon. Multiplied resistance effectiveness exponentially. A farmer with a Sten could ambush a German supply convoy. A shopkeeper could assassinate a collaborator. The psychological impact on German occupation forces was profound. Nowhere was safe. Anyone could be armed. The crude little weapon that cost less than a pair of boots tied down hundreds of thousands of German troops that could have been fighting on the Eastern Front. The Sten's influence extended far beyond the Second World War. Israeli forces used Stens extensively during the 1948 War of Independence. Many were copies manufactured in underground workshops, proof that the design simplicity enabled production under the most primitive conditions. The design influenced submachine gun development worldwide. The Australian Owen gun, the Polish Błyskawica, the Danish Madsen, M50, all bore the Sten's fingerprints. Cheap, simple, stamped steel. The lesson had been learned. Sophistication in weapons design is a luxury. Simplicity is survival. Today, surviving Stens can be found in museums across Britain. The Imperial War Museum in London holds several examples, including the rare Mark from IS silenced version. The Royal Armouries in Leeds has an extensive collection, including workshop tools and manufacturing equipment. These weapons look crude even in glass cases. The welding is rough, the finish is non-existent. They look like something cobbled together in a shed, because many of them were. That was the entire point. Return to that hedgerow in Normandy. The commando with his Sten waiting. In the darkness, this weapon represents something more than firepower. It represents a philosophy of warfare born from desperation. When everything has been lost, when the enemy outnumbers you 6-1, when precision manufacturing is a fantasy and skilled labor is in the trenches. You make what you can with what you have. You abandon elegance. You embrace crude effectiveness. You produce 4 million weapons that your soldiers complain about, that military historians dismiss, that the enemy fears enough to copy. The German voices in the darkness move closer. The commando's finger tightens on the trigger. The weapon in his hands is ugly, unreliable, dangerous to everyone, including its user. It cost less than a decent meal in peacetime, less than the German soldier's helmet, less than the boots on the enemy's feet. But it shoots. And in June 1944, in a hedgerow in Normandy, with civilization hanging by a thread, that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. The Sten gun was never beautiful, it was never beloved, but it was there, in sufficient numbers, at the critical moment, when Britain needed millions of weapons and possessed neither the time nor the resources to build them properly. The Sten delivered 4 million crude, ugly, unreliable weapons that helped win a war. Sometimes that is what victory looks like. Not elegant, not sophisticated, just possible.